Ryan and Liz Miller. I see Matt and Ryan and Liz Miller, Joey, Kelly, Chris Campany, Jael. Welcome, everybody. Um, how are we looking for a quorum then? Hi, Peter. Um, and just double checking who's in the room with Liz Miller.
No one's in the room with me. I'm on the.
Oh, sorry, Liz Amler, I meant to
Oh,
say.
okay.
Sorry,
Good, good,
Liz.
good. I am getting into a
My
room
bad.
as we speak. I'll
My
I'll be
bad.
on camera in about 5 minutes.
Okay, okay.
Oh,
Liz Amler, sorry.
yeah, we have CEO and member of the public, no council members.
Okay, great. I I think we may be just short now that we are a full house of 20, however many we are, 23. There we go. Secretary Moore, I think, puts us over the edge. Okay, great. Well, welcome everybody. Let me just double check folks can hear me okay. I'm not in my usual setup today. Is my audio okay?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. Great. So today we're going to focus on some of the additional chapters. I'm going to share the agenda on the screen, and apologies, we're kind of just in real-time delivery right now with materials, and the agenda just got posted a moment ago because I was late getting it up. But let me share what it looks like right now, and maybe Liz Amler, you could drop it in the chat. Um, Hang on just a second. Okay, so here we go. We're going to spend the first hour and a half or so um, looking into some additional text of chapters. There's four there that you can see: the public engagement, the land acknowledgement, some appendices, and some tables. There's also a little bit of leftover from June 9. Um, and uh, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a sec. So then we'll take some public comment around, we'll break, take some public comment around one, and then we'll take a final look at priority recommendations, top 10, top 52. And we'll also, what's not on the agenda is we'll talk a little bit about the 23rd and what we aim to do then. This is what we have. Any questions about what we're going to do today? Okay. There's a piece of me that wants to do a little reading time as well. So when we get going, maybe we'll do a little pause and let people do some reading as well. It's just been like fast and furious in so many words. And so I do sense how challenging this probably is to keep up with. Before we do anything else, let's just do our usual approval of the minutes. They're linked right in here. I can click through right now if you want. So we have the minutes from our meeting last week. Some pretty specific uh, minutes about what to do in the chapters. So you can see all these. And we'll talk about what's been done with them. Any questions about the minutes? Any concerns?
Just
Yeah, Jared?
just wanted to request, since I was one of the folks who said it, and I know others said it in the chat, that towards the end where it talks about the presentation from SEI, there is language. I'll just let you get down there so we can all look at it together. Um, uh, is it further down? Yes, right there. The last bullet point that says health costs and benefits are not included in the modeling. Can these be included in the modeling? I just would request that the minutes reflect that it was a request that the health costs and benefits be included in the modeling, not just could they be in the modeling.
Got it. Okay, thanks, Jared. We can do that update. If everybody's okay with that update to the minutes. Any concerns about making that update that Jared's saying? Okay, great.
Other
Okay.
than that, I thought they looked good. No other comments from me.
Thanks, Jared. Anything else on the minutes? Or anybody need some more time on them? Okay. All right. Without hearing concerns, further concerns, or requests for more time, let's treat the minutes as approved. All right. Uh, now back to ours. We are using the let's see if I actually can show. There we go. This is the place um, where we are consolidating versions that need to be either reviewed or sort of semi-final draft versions that we'll be approving as a package. In essence, when we get to next week, what we're going to be approving as the plan will be this. We're not going to make an attempt to turn it into a pretty single document. There will be beautification that happens later and all that. But this is what we're going to be approving. And so we've been using this as a storage place for the latest versions and versions that should be reviewed. Today, we were going to focus on a few bits and bobs that we didn't get to last time that we intended to last time. And we've got the land acknowledgements, um, the public engagement, and some of these things down at the bottom, um, like appendices, like CAP coordination, legislative action, rulemaking, definitions, that kind of stuff. So that's what we're going to be working on today. My suggestion is actually that we do a couple like holdover things from last week, and then we actually pause and give folks maybe just 10 minutes to, if you've already read it, to reread the land acknowledgement, the public engagement, and some of these things down at the bottom here. Basically, the things that say pending review at June 16. That's the what stuff we're going to work on today. Um,
David, can I just ask a clarifying question?
yeah.
Earlier, it sounded like you were making reference to other appendices for review at this meeting. Is
Mhm.
it just the ones that have the parenthetical pending review at June 16th meeting? Or is there something else on this list that we
That is such a good question. I want to consult with Liz Amler on this, and if Jane's there, what is it we're really is ready for our discussion today? Um, in addition to land acknowledgement, public engagement, and legislative action and rulemaking table. Liz Amler or Jane, is there something else that we were supposed to be doing today?
Definitions are included in that.
Definitions. Okay. That would be the other thing, Jared, would be
Thank
definitions.
you.
Okay. And Jane's putting in the chat, the team, the coordination team here has taken a little bit of liberty to respond to a lot of the feedback we got in the public comment around trying to use some plain language and the name of the chapter is trying to better track the work and plain language. So I think you'll see using the phrase like emissions reductions as opposed to cross-sector mitigation. I think there's some effort to do that. And so I just want people not to get alarmed about that. And if we need to have a conversation about it, welcome that. Okay. All right. But let's pick up where we left off. Oh, Jared, so you have a hand up?
Sorry, just one other clarifying question based on what Jane put in the chat, saying that there's appendices linked in some of the chapters, including the assessing progress chapter. I'm assuming on this bulleted list, that's the progress assessment and implementation chapter. Is that for today or for next Monday? It doesn't have a parenthetical after it at this point.
Oh, okay. So that's for today. So maybe that's one of the ones we'll give people a little bit of time to read. Um, and to if you haven't been able to click through this to this one, we'll give folks a moment to do some reading.
Thank you.
Okay. Um, all right. So the thing we didn't get to last week that we had hoped to, is there were some questions about how to and where to, yeah, and the reason buildings and thermal, sorry to jump into the chat. The reason that is I'm still waiting on Rich and Carrick to solve that 2 sentence challenge in buildings and thermal, and that's why it's not reposted there. So we can talk about that in a sec, but thanks, Kelly, for um, naming that. Um, what we didn't get to last week is how to effectively represent the health recommendations in this plan, whether it's in the rural resilience chapter, um, which is here called Adaptation and Building Resilience in Communities in the Built Environment, or if it's up in the health chapter at the top. And I think what we kind of took uh, we kind of took an approach of having it mentioned in this adaptation and building resilience in communities chapter. And then it's also, there's a sentence mentioning it in the health chapter saying detail on priority recommendations is included below in the chapter on adaptation and building resilience in communities. So that's how we resolve that issue. And if anybody feels very strongly about that, welcome a conversation. It seemed like pretty common sense, to be honest, but it was on our punch list for last week and we just didn't get to it. And I don't know, Liz Amler, if the version of this one has that in it. I'll just quickly look under the priority actions. It'll take me a second to find it, so maybe it's dangerous for me to share my screen while I do that. In any case, does anybody feel particularly strongly about this issue of the health recommendations showing up in the community resilience chapter, and it's referenced in the health chapter that there are priority recommendations around it? So it's in both places, essentially. Any concerns with that particular point? Okay, great. That's an easy one. I will say what we've been doing as well is trying to implement, trying to write edits based on what you asked for in the last meeting. So for instance, the transportation chapter, we put in the footnotes and the things that were asked for in the last time. And I think it's helpful for everybody to take a look at those, and I can point to some right now. And then that can be like a little bit of homework also this week to go back and really review. But essentially taking those notes that I just showed you from the notes from June 9th and updating the chapters with it, right? I'll give you a little sampling of that just real quick, just quickly. If you give me 1 second, I'll show you transportation and some of the edits that got made in there based on that. If you remember, one of the pieces we spent a fair amount of time on in our transportation conversation last week was how to talk about the cap and invest programs and how to talk about the availability of those programs right now, so as not to be potentially misleading that somehow there's a pathway like right now to be able to join, and some of that language might be interpreted that way. And so you all asked for a little footnote here when we talked about Vermont advancing a primary regulatory or policy tool, and line obligations, identify preparing and joining a cap and invest, and you asked for a footnote. And so to say, and here's the footnote, footnote 10, to be sure, this is me writing, by the way, trying to interpret what you all said. The Western Climate Initiative stated in spring 2025 it is not currently accepting new members, and New York has yet to implement its initiative. As of writing this plan, there's no multi-state cap and invest initiative for Vermont to join. However, this plan calls for taking the steps needed to join such a multi-state initiative in the future. Okay, so I was trying to take what you all said last time of like, this plan calls for joining cap and invest, and there's a reality that right now that's not a thing. So that's one piece. And then the related piece to that, and Michelle, I'll get your hand in just one second, is when we hearken back to this statement in the addendum from November 2022, which was problematic for some of you, the solution that we got to last week was saying, okay, but also point out the reports that have been done since then. So here's some new language. And unfortunately, the PDF, if this were a Word document, you would see all this in track change. So it's a little bit frustrating that this version doesn't show the track change. But the council, however, points to 2 reports since this 2022 statement that help provide more guidance on the ability of a cap and invest initiative to deliver the scale and pace of emissions. Again, using the words from up here, scale and pace of emissions reductions. Envisioned on the GWSA. One report is a technical study presented in early 2025. In addition, the Office of the State Treasurer issued a report responding to the technical work. Again, not making any judgments around those analyses, but just stating that they're there. Michelle?
Thank you, David. I appreciate the way that these have been addressed as we discussed last time. Since last time, I identified that perhaps in the transportation sector, we had not properly emphasized the changes in aviation and the role that electrification of aviation is expected to play going forward. And thank you for showing this section that I sent over. I just wanted to make sure everybody was aware of the additional language that I identified and requested.
Thanks, Michelle. I'm glad you brought that up. And that's another change in this version. And again, if this were the Word version, you'd see this in track change, so it'd be easy to spot. But again, and there was a comment, I think it was from Peter or somebody as well, about, hey, let's make sure there's no confusion about this. And so this was a paragraph that was added in talking about aviation. Okay, so that's the kind of way we've been taking the comments from last week and trying to incorporate them into the document. All right. And so the same with electricity, a little blitz and burbs, that's not the expression. And then with buildings and thermal, most are done, but Rich and Carrick, I need a little love from them to help me with finishing those last 2 sentences for buildings and thermal. Rich?
Yes, so apologies, Carrick and I have not been able to get together to do that. We will do it soon, and I think it's a solvable problem. I raised my hand actually to make a different point.
Okay, great.
In the footnote that you just read,
Yeah,
concerning the cap and invest, where we explain to the reader that the council recommends taking the steps to be able to join a cap and invest regime, when it's possible. We also, in that priority action, go on to say that complementary measures to a cap and invest are needed, and needed in the meantime as well. And
Yeah.
it seems to me that an additional sentence in your footnote there,
10, yeah.
yeah, it should say, I don't have the exact language in my head, but should say something like, the council also recommends taking complementary actions in order to reduce emissions, pending entry into a cap and invest regime. The truth is that we need to take these actions for 2 reasons. First is we need to take a number of complementary actions in order to reduce emissions starting now. and not waiting to join a cap and invest. That's number one. And the plan makes that very clear, I think. And the second is that, to realize that when a cap and invest scheme, if we were to join one, and if the revenue were made available to be invested, it's important that we already have programs up and running that can deliver on, and make use of that revenue without having to start from a dead stop. So I think it's important for us to point out that, yeah, it's our top priority to join a cap and invest scheme, but we shouldn't be sitting around waiting.
Right, right. And I think we've got that language very clear in the priority action, the way we talk about cap and invest.
Yeah,
And I'm hearing what you're saying is like get a little of that into this footnote as well.
just add a sentence at the end of
Yeah.
this that captures that point.
Okay, thanks, Rich. Yeah, Jared?
Thanks, David. I just wanted to suggest a slight revision that I hope is just in the interest of clarity, and that folks could agree to. This is for the second sentence of that footnote, number
Yep.
10 at the bottom of 4. I'm going to put it in the chat. I think that the way it's written now, there is no program to join. I'd rather focus it less on there is no program to join and say there is not an immediate opportunity for Vermont to join, because programs exist and they change over time, what status they are in terms of their implementation or whether they're accepting new members or not. I just think this will be clearer and more accurate.
Okay, so the phrase would be there is not an immediate opportunity for Vermont to join.
Yeah, rather than there is not a program.
Okay, great. Does anybody have problems with that? There is not an immediate opportunity for Vermont to join. Okay, great. Okay, I'll stop sharing now. Thanks for that feedback. The other pieces you can see, and I don't know, Liz, is there a way we can get the track change up as well? It's a shame folks can't do a quick sort of scan through. I'm not quite sure how to make that work. Okay. All right, so this is what I was thinking, folks. If I go back to this, hang on one second. If I go back to the list of all this stuff that we're about to review, I'd like to give folks some reading time right now. And just so if you read some of them, but maybe not all of them, let's dive into the ones you haven't read. Again, we're going to do land acknowledgement, public engagement, progress assessment, I think is what Jane said, the legislative action rulemaking, and then the definitions. Okay, so I say,
Sorry, David, and acknowledgements. So I actually put a link in the chat of everything that we're supposed to review today, and it includes acknowledgements.
great. Okay. Super. Okay. Right, it's that slide that's in the chat. Yeah. So why don't we take, if folks are up for it, the next 14 minutes or so. Jane, did you want to say something before we do this?
David, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you're great.
Okay, great. I just want to be crystal clear that if it doesn't say pending review at the June 23rd meeting, this is your chance to comment. So it's all chapters that have been previously reviewed, and the ones that are particularly highlighted are highlighted because they're new to this meeting. They haven't been seen by the council before. But the other ones are all, this is like your last sort of shot, or intended to be a last shot. So just because it doesn't have pending review at June 16th, I think that's because those were chapters that have been in flux for a period of time now, but otherwise are largely considered final at this point unless counselors have comments.
Okay. Yeah, that's helpful. I think, yeah, it's kind of a crazy crunch mode, the amount of text in play right now. And I think the good news is we've been looking at these several times now, and we're making very minor edits at this point on the ones we've looked at before, and they're entirely in line with the notes from previous meetings. The ones that we haven't looked at are the ones I just mentioned, land acknowledgement, uh, and the like. So I think let's take until 10 minutes before the hour. It's 13 minutes, and just quickly, everybody, tuck into the ones you haven't looked at yet. And let's find if there's anything that's concerning to folks. Let's make a little punch list of that and then use our time to work through it. So I'm going to turn off my camera for the next 12, 13 minutes. Folks, just tuck into here, do some reading, grab the ones you haven't looked at. If you have any questions about versions, just text or throw a question in the chat. But I'm going to turn my video off, and let's just do some reading time now for the next 12 minutes. Sam Swanson, your audio is on. You might want to turn it off. Would 5 more minutes be enough time? Or would folks want more than that? Would anybody appreciate more than 5 more minutes of reading time? Joey, thumbs up. I guess that means 5 is good.
I could probably use a little more time, but
Use more? Okay. Well,
I
why don't we
prefer
go, why don't we go to quarter of then? Sorry, I got my numbers wrong when I talked earlier. Why don't we go to quarter of the hour, if that's all right? All right, folks. Let's get back in here. I bet you all could have read for another hour, perhaps. Thanks for stuff in the chat. If it's minor stuff, we can just go ahead and do it. Jared, for your comment about the cap table, action table, let's make that our punch list. What I'd love to do right now is just do a quick punch list of anything that came up that rises to the level of needing a conversation. If it's just like fixing a bad word choice or something like that, just send it to us and we'll make those changes. But if it needs a conversation, let's get it on a punch list right now. I'll make that number one on the punch list if that's all right, Jared, not out of because it's number one importance, just because it's there. All right, so let's do this, folks. Before we solve any of these, let's figure out what it is we need to solve. We have the one on the action table. Make sure it's updated. Rich, what's on your list?
I just have a question. Maybe I'm missing something somewhere, but in the chapter which is called progress assessment,
Okay.
The version that I looked at has a fair amount of text describing the Clean Cars 2 saga, but there's not an overview of the state's emission profile and how it's tracking in relation to the goals of the GWSA, which is what I expected to see there. So is that written up somewhere else? Because if I'm just a citizen trying to figure out how are we doing, that existing text doesn't answer the question.
Yeah, I think what Jane put in the chat right now, I think is where that is, Rich. The scientific underpinning for emissions reductions has the most up-to-date information about how Vermont's doing.
All right, I'll take a further look at that, but there was a ton of scientific information in the text that I looked at, but I didn't see the overall status of emission reduction policies highlighted there.
In terms of numbers and what it means for inventory and that kind of stuff.
Just for a reader to pick it up and say, how are we doing? I mean, it quickly, it's impressively scientific, and there's a lot of hardcore data in there. But I'll take another look at it and see if it's there.
Okay. And Jane, can you help out verbally at all on that? Can you want to jump in? You're on mute, Jane. Maybe you're in the car. Sorry. All right, we'll come
Sorry, I
back
was
to you.
having a really hard time finding my mute button.
Okay, there you go.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that in the scientific underpinning chapter around the emissions reductions, there is intended to be the updated greenhouse gas inventory for 2022 that we're just finished drafting on Friday of last week. And it's making its way around here for internal review, but Brian just got the data this morning to put in the updated chart as draft. So that is the chapter that it will be in. And it will have the emissions profile with respect to the GWSA targets through 2022.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. I would hope that gets presented in a way that, a reader, a concerned citizen can pick it up and understand the data, because, the scientific data in that chapter is impressive, but pretty dense.
Okay. All right. So if I'm hearing you correctly, Rich, wherever it lands, it should be clear enough that an average reader can say, hey, how's Vermont doing against its, or not against, but how is it doing in emissions reductions? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Great. Joey?
I had a similar question because it seemed if it's a progress assessment that it would speak to the progress. I think there's some great content in there. So I just wonder, can we, if even if it is in the scientific, can we just either have a chart or just a couple of sentences that speak to that? Because I imagine people will read this in chapters and maybe not in full. So that maybe the progress assessment, I would instinctually go there to answer the question, are we on track? So I just wonder if there could be some reference to it.
Okay, so make a second reference in there, even if it's in the scientific chapter, make a second reference in this chapter to say da 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 da, just a quick
Or
reference.
like an image that, I mean, you could use the EAN image that we all lean into that shows something that makes it accessible and speaks to the progress point, even if it's elsewhere.
Okay, great. Thanks. Anything else for our punch list that we want to work on? Secretary Moore, welcome
Yeah.
back.
Thanks. The Vermont Energy Economy chapter, I know I had sent comments on the draft, the original draft that I think Ken Jones had prepared for the subcommittee. Jared took another run through it. I still have what feels like some significant comments and concerns. I don't know, David, how you want to address them, and I frankly didn't get to that before I left for vacation. So happy to prepare a markup and circulate it around, but I think having that chapter back on the agenda for the 23rd may be important because I think there's still some substantive concerns.
Okay, let's put it on as a punch list item now. If we have some time today, let's actually look at some of the content there, Julie. And if that way we can prime the pump if we want to look at it, a new version on the 23rd. Anything else? Jane, your hand's still up, yeah?
Yeah, I was just gonna go back to the progress assessment for a second, because
Mm-hmm.
that was really intended to be around recommendations in the climate action plan. I hear counselors' concerns about where you turn to look for emissions reductions info, and I guess I just want to suggest that that there be a reference specifically to the other chapter, which is related to emissions reductions, and then send the reader to that chapter where there is going to be the discussion and have the table, rather than sort of trying to speak to it in two places, and just see if that addresses it. And I also
Okay.
saw Jared's comment or others in the chat about just making sure the charts and tables are reflective, because we haven't looked at those in a while. So certainly on ACC2 and ACT, we can update that.
Sounds great. Okay. Okay. Jared, what else? You're on mute, Jared.
Sorry about that.
Oh.
One other thing to add to the list for review is in the legislative action and rulemaking table for priority recommendations. Right now, the structure of that table just speaks to or just considers a role for the legislature and not for the administration. So I want to suggest that we add a column to that row to that table that would speak to the possibility for administrative action as well as the possibility for legislative action, so that is a more kind of balanced and holistic presentation of the multiple roles.
Great. And let's look at that in just a sec when we get to it. Okay, great. In folks reading, anything else rise up to needing a conversation right now? Okay. Great. Well, let's work through some of these and see if we can actually make progress. We are in the sort of final throes. So anytime it can sort of like put something to bed, it's dreamy, right? As opposed to, oh, let's look at it again on the 23rd. Ideally, we can make as much progress as we can. All right. So if we were to go back one more time in the progress assessment chapter, there's some obvious things in terms of making it more current. Is there anything, Jared, when you look through that, or Jane, when you look through it, you think ooh, actually need to have a quick conversation? Or is it all just pretty straightforward, like, hey, just say the latest, what's happened? Is there anything worth a conversation, or is it just go do it? Okay, not from you.
If there is anything that comes up in the review, I'd be happy to work with Jane or anybody else on that. Those were the three most obvious ones. I think there may be others, but I think this is just about an objective kind of what is the current status of this.
Great. Okay. And on the second point about trying to get something about emissions reductions and how's Vermont doing in its emissions reductions pathway or effort into that chapter, would folks be okay doing what Jane just said, which is saying, referencing the other chapter, saying, for detail on how Vermont is doing on its emissions reductions, please see, such and such chapter, and making sure that in the science chapter, there is a very clear, digestible story about how Vermont's doing against its emissions reductions goals. That makes sense, folks? So we reference it, but say, go see it in the other chapter. And then when it's written in the other chapter, we make sure it's clear in plain language and that kind of stuff, and not sort of buried in a lot of data and science language. Would that be okay, Joey and Jared and others who are Rich and who brought it up? Thumbs up, Joey? Okay. Great. Oh, thanks, Rich. Awesome. Okay. Great. Can we look, before we get to the energy economy chapter, I want to jump to what Jared just talked about, which is the legislative action and rulemaking chapter. I'll pull it up on my screen, and then I think Jared and I spoke about this just before the meeting, so I had a little prep of where he's going with this. Hang on just a second. Joey, would you want to speak about this, or is this another topic you want to talk about?
This topic.
Great. Okay. So yeah, what Jared and I spoke about and what he just mentioned, and Joey, I'll turn it over to you after that, which is first of all, there's a recognition that there's no triggering of the rulemaking under the law here. And so that's put in the paragraph. And then in the table, there's no mention here of the possibility of administrative action to do this. So a lot of these things, you could imagine there's some piece of administrative action that could happen, as well as legislative action. And so, Jared, what was the language you were suggesting for like this column and then another column that would be administrative?
I was going to suggest the language possible to advance via legislative action, and then a second column says possible to advance via administrative action. I think a number of these have roles for both the legislature and the administration. And as I see it, our role as a council is to identify the recommended strategies and actions that can do what the Solutions Act is calling for, but is not necessarily to be lawyers around the authority of the administration versus the authority of the legislature. And I think many of these things have a role for both. Like just in the first one, developing a framework for the reporting of greenhouse gas emissions, that is something that is an administrative action. It says it right there in the text, and as is, I think this is kind of incomplete. So that would be my suggestion: possible to advance through legislative action, possible to advance through administrative action, and then we focus more on the action and the recommendation itself rather than the implementing party, which there may be political and legal disagreement about, but I don't know as though we need to get into that. We just need to focus on the action and recognize where and who that could be advanced via.
Thanks, Jared. Joey, and then over to you, Julie. Joey?
Yeah, no, I had just this very similar assessment and agree that could be legislative and or likely and executive branch authority. And then some, for example, on the continuing to monitor and maintain Vermont's adoption of the clean car rules. I don't think legislative authority is needed. I mean, Ann already has it, I think, under 10 BSA I don't know. I think they already have that. So I do think that it's important to have like more clarity on there's a role for the legislature, there's likely a role for the administrative branch, and another column, and just underscoring the importance of sort of partnership in achieving many of these things.
Thanks, Joey. Julie?
Yeah, I wonder if for simplicity's sake, we just put a sentence up at the top that acknowledges many of these actions could require a combination of legislative and or administrative action and not try to represent it in the table. I think we're going to spend a lot of time going back and forth on it. The first one being a perfect example, which is this will require statutory changes, staffing and funding in addition to the work A&R is committing to. And it just seems like given where we're at, I'm not sure that there's an enormous value in trying to flag them, and they probably all end up showing both, and maybe just deleting it is the most straightforward approach.
Right. So if I understand what you're saying, Julie, it's like the table's actually not very helpful. We have our list of top 10, top 52 actions. Probably they all have some component of legislative, some component of administrative. So let's just say that. Okay, great. Liz Miller?
Yeah, that might get to what I was going to ask. I wondered why we need this at all. So I think it gets to what Julie just said, because I agree with Jared and Joey that the legislative action section is both incomplete and probably overly legislative in focus. Can we get rid of it altogether and just put that sentence Julie suggested with the priority actions themselves?
Right. And so if we were to do something like that, and I want to check back with Joey and Jared on this, but if we were to do something like that, so we would change these sentences, right? Not talking about if followed, we don't need to do this. We can just say the actions contained in this plan will likely require legislative action and or blah, blah, blah. You know.
Combination of whatever, yeah.
Right, right.
Otherwise it feels repetitive, and when I reviewed it, it also weirdly, like not conflicted with, but it kind of like overlaps or runs over the priority actions themselves to have it separately like this. Like I wouldn't know which one to look at if I were an outside reader, and I'd hate for them to look at this one instead. You know what I mean? Given the care that went into the other lists.
Great. So let's say if we did to do that, and Joey, can you, if you react, and if someone wants to help me, I'll just quickly take some notes on that kind of text so I don't wing it too much afterwards. Joey.
I'm happy to work with you on the text later, but I generally am very supportive of this idea and could imagine why it was hard to discern. But speaking to the partnership between the legislature and the administrative branch and pointing the priorities, I think would be important, especially because I was a little confused by some of them that seemed duplicative. Like
literally duplicative. Yeah.
But I wasn't clear on what they were, so it seemed challenging, and some things seemed missing, like the potential short-term, the recommendation for a short-term funding fix, like a thermal energy benefits charge. Anyway, it was a little confusing, so something that it speaks to this point would be helpful. I do wonder, I mean, it is embedded in the GWSA anyway, and I think we're all well aware, but this is not, we are not clear about compelling rulemaking, but we are required to come up with a plan that does directionally put us on a pathway to achieving our targets. So do we want to acknowledge that rulemaking could be part of what is required under the secretary's own authority, or just leave it? Because it's so implicit.
Right. So there, it's here, right? So it says there are currently no rules being put forward under that timeline. Discretion is given to the agency to advance the envision reporting rule of law timeline. It does. So it's like giving that nod of like, and then these would be the two sentences that get changed, right?
Discretion is given, you could put through rulemaking or otherwise. This is a little confusing when it says nothing is being adopted by rules, but some rules may happen under existing.
We're saying no rules are being under that timeline. That's what it's saying. The July 1st timeline. It's not saying no rules, saying no rules being put forward under that timeline. So if I were to do this right now, based on what I'm hearing from you all, I would take these two sentences out, right? And I would write something that says, you know, the actions in this plan will require a combination of legislative and administrative actions to blah, 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 right? Something along those lines. Or the recommendations in this plan will require a combination of legislative and administrative action, period. Does that work, Rich?
Yeah, I think it does. And I think that Secretary Moore said it nicely, exactly what you just said, frankly. And I think Liz Miller's right that we don't need to repeat all the priority actions in a table when we already have the priority actions. And this language really pertains to not just the priority actions, but all the actions. So
Excellent. Great.
So just to be clear, we would pull the highlighted sentences and put them with the recommendations chapter and delete everything else?
I don't know. I'm actually a little confused by Liz Miller's chat.
yeah, I thought David said that the beginning of the paragraph is fine. As far as I'm concerned, even the title is fine if you just say for the recommendations instead of just the priority recommendations. The implementation of the cap will require.
But I just made some
Yeah.
suggested language in the chat. And so you would leave everything you have until right here, and then you would delete these two, and you would add in the sentence I just dropped in the chat.
Why do
And
you?
then delete the
it's
table.
Like it becomes like a standalone paragraph, basically, not a subchapter. Is that the idea?
Yeah, it's just a recognition that there's not a rulemaking being required under the timeline of July 1st, 2026.
And then, sorry to be dense, David, but where does this then fit? Because I'm fine with if it's just embedded in a chapter, but which chapter?
I think it's its own thing. I'm not sure. Jane,
And could
maybe
it
you
go
can help me.
into the sort of preamble somewhere or the?
Sure.
Okay, because it feels like you wouldn't want it to be like one paragraph to be its own subchapter. That seems odd.
I'll do whatever. Or this could be one of these things where it's like, as long as we agree on the content, we'll figure it out if it goes into the preamble language to the priority actions, or whether it goes into something else, or whether it needs to stand on its own just out of the, simplicity. Right. Jane's suggesting the chat, it goes in the conclusion. Okay.
Yeah, and the executive summary.
And the executive sums. Okay, so great. Let me take notes on this. All right, so hang on. Not only are we deleting, no, we're deleting the whole thing, right? We're deleting this, delete the table. And don't make this a stand alone, but rather put the paragraph. Okay. And change the last two sentences. Okay, I got the notes. We got it. We can do it. All right. Thank you, everyone. So with that, we have some time to deal with the Vermont
Sorry,
Energy.
David,
Oh,
just
sorry.
before we leave that,
Mhm.
I want to make sure, I think that second sentence should say the climate action plan, not the initial climate action plan, since we're working
Oh,
on.
there's like an edit. That's like from the last version.
Yeah, I think it was
Right.
carryover language.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I found that one other time too. And delete and change reference. Okay. Done. Okay. So, Secretary Moore, you had said you still have some concerns about the way the Vermont Energy Economy chapter is written, and I'm wondering if we could just flag some of those now that would help do some, you know, maybe we can address it, all of us right now, if we have the time. And I recognize you probably don't have it all locked in. But
I-
if there's like phrases or things that you know that it's just like, I'm gonna flag this. I wouldn't be at all sad to play with some of those right now for 10 minutes or so. Um,
Yeah, I'm trying to think what the best place to start is. Some of them are organizational, right? Like we jump back and forth between transportation and building heat and or yeah, in a way that I didn't entirely follow when we're like page 5, right? We've spent time talking about weatherization, then we get to purchase of vehicles, then we go back to appliances and heat pumps and sort of that back and forth. It doesn't make a ton of sense to me. So there's some organizational issues. Um, I guess I just frankly am interested in understanding, appreciating the figure at the top of page 6 comes from the EAN report. The 59% recirculating in the Vermont economy of annual electricity spending. I don't have the same sense of how that works, particularly since a lot of our electricity is provided by an out-of-state Hydro-Quebec entity. And it's mostly just a question for my own edification. There were, let's see, I just made some quick notes to myself. We don't have a lot, there's not quite parallel narratives between folks working in the fossil fuel economy versus the clean energy economy narratives, in terms of the wages in particular. And I'm not sure the wages are super helpful. Also not clear to me why why the clean energy employment numbers are in a section with Efficiency Vermont as opposed to just talking about employment numbers in general. Seems like it could be maybe a more appropriate energy or organizational strategy. On page 107, the couple sentences around forest resources, I think need some work. Checking with our team quickly here this morning, while wood pellets do come from outside Vermont, there is an opportunity to produce those in Vermont, similar to wood chips and cordwood, and I think we at least need to acknowledge that, because I see that as a strong distinction with fossil fuels, which obviously we can't produce here in Vermont. The cost of climate damages just feels a little out of place where it falls in. And then there's some more language about resilience and adaptation at the very end of the chapter. And maybe those two sections can be combined and point specifically to the rural resilience and adaptation chapter. And I suspect when this was originally drafted, we didn't necessarily have the opportunity to know what was going to be in that chapter. And so maybe similar to some of the conversation we just had, there could be an opportunity to shrink that text and make a reference to what is in the rural resilience and adaptation chapter. Again, I have a question about the EAN figure on page 9. I'm just unsure how we get to 20% energy burden for a salary that's not all that different than the next category, right? Like the median of those goes up by a third, and the energy burden increases by 2/3. And just interested in understanding that a bit more. Sorry, I wasn't fully organized
know.
here. I think those were the major pieces. So a couple where I guess I would be helped to understand some of the information behind a couple of those critical EAN figures. And then organizationally, there's some pieces that just are a struggle for me. And then I think, high level, the other piece would be if it makes sense to maybe not have the resilience piece in here, knowing that I think a lot of that similar information is contained in the rural resilience and adaptation chapter.
Okay. Thanks, Julie, for doing that on the fly. I appreciate that. Okay, so there was a number of things where it's like, I want to understand this better. We might be tackle those first, and then some of these other ones that might be a little trickier. You had mentioned two things you want to understand a little bit better. One is about the figures. Well, actually, they're both about EAN figures. The first is understanding why such a high recirculating number, given that Vermont purchases a fair amount of electricity from outside the state. And the second was, why such a big jump in the energy burden when it's not such a big jump in the income bracket change? So Jared, you probably are closest to anybody on this. So
Yeah.
could you help on those two?
I might suggest, just in the interest of time and process, that so that was a long list there. I am happy to address those in comments and suggested edits to the chapter, and can talk with and work with Julie on that. And maybe we, right now I think there's like a list of a dozen things that came up, and then maybe focus in on anything that's outstanding still by next week, which is hopefully a shorter list, rather than going through all of that right now.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, that's fine too. And I think if there's anything that, I mean, it seems like some of this is just writing issues, like organizational piece about how to handle the resilience piece. Like, so that feels like just like a writing issue.
Yeah.
Okay. David Mears?
Just a question for Julie. Julie, I'm wondering, for folks that flip to this chapter and want to kind of understand the climate economy, I'm a little concerned about taking out the references to kind of the adaptation, resilience, and kind of rural working lands pieces. And actually, one of my comments was going to be, could we fluff that up a little bit? So I wanted to get your thoughts on whether there's there might be a missed opportunity to kind of talk about the broader economic benefits.
Yeah, I agree. And maybe having Chris be part of the conversation too. It feels like right now these two this chapter, the brief write-up on resilience and what's in the rural resilience and adaptation chapter don't talk to each other.
Yeah.
And I think there's an opportunity to tighten that up some. And it may be pulling more of it into the cost information into here. I think, and Chris can correct me if I'm wrong, as I recall, the rural resilience chapter is more qualitative and not quantitative, but maybe there's a way to knit these together a little bit better.
Yeah, and just for context, as I imagine folks will recognize, I think that part of that we wanted to see what was written in the resilience and adaptation chapter. When we drafted this, it wasn't ready yet. So I think we can advance that crosswalk.
Okay.
I'll just add, I mean, right now, there's not a lot of numbers attached to it, but certainly like through the RIS process and other things, we can attach numbers to it probably. And we can certainly look back at what right, there's not only what we need to do, there's also still the cost of recovering from what's happened over the last several years. So we could make it more quantitative, but I don't think we have that kind of time right now.
Well, I think we could certainly easily and quickly pull in the data from the Rebuild by Design report in terms of number of federally declared disasters and total, recognizing that that's only a portion and that total costs go far beyond the federal disaster costs that have been tallied, but that would at least be one reference point that we can easily add in.
Yeah, and I guess where I'm getting at too is like trying to figure out what is the cost of evolving our historic settlements up and away from flood and hazards and fluvial erosion hazards, or there was the great article in the Washington Post about Barry. What's that going to cost? Just Barry alone. So I mean, yes. So we could add a lot more numbers to it, but I don't know if at this point we've got that kind of time to do it.
Yeah. I mean, there's some time, just not a whole lot, I guess is the point. And so it's at this point, it's like we need to get everything down on paper in the next day or two, and then be able to review and sign off next Monday, right? So if folks are willing to put some time in the next 24 hours to pull something out, that would be awesome. Okay. When you hear this conversation, other counselors, is there anything that's like, ooh, actually, I'm not super psyched about that, or I'm not happy about the way this chapter is? I'm just curious, other counselors, any concern about this? Rich?
Well, I thought on the whole it was well written and readable, and therefore any public member member of the public who wanted to understand this would learn from reading it, which I thought was great. That's comment one. I agree that perhaps it makes sense for Jared and Secretary Moore just to sit down and work through her comments. But I can just chime in from the point of view of someone who sat in on a lot of electric rate cases. I'm not surprised by the numbers, the in-state, out-of-state fractions there, because a really substantial portion of the cost of service for an electric company is the capital infrastructure that's in Vermont, and the labor that's used to maintain the lines and poles and deliver service to customers. So I'm sure that when Jared sits down with Secretary Moore, he'll be able to show those numbers.
We've sat down with the Public Service Department in the past to review those numbers and compare notes, and happy to do that with Julie and anyone else from A&R as well.
Great. Okay. Liz?
Yeah, great. And to the extent anyone needs anything on that topic, of course, you can feel free to loop me. I agree with Rich that it's a really clear and easy to read chapter, which is great. My only caution, I guess, is that it's so packed full of data. I wanted a chance to sort of digest it. And in skimming it, what I noticed was something I think Chris may have just said a second ago, either in chat or here, I can't remember, frankly. There's definitely costs not included. So we just need to really make sure that it's clear that it's, for example, or, including, not like on the storm recovery front, in the GMP territory, all of the storm costs, which have been very, we've had devastating storms over the last several years, as folks know, those are not captured in the FEMA and federal disaster funds. Those are paid for by customers and are not in those numbers. So it's just an example of why we need to make sure it's not giving an incomplete picture.
Yeah. Thanks, Liz. Chris?
Yeah, I mean, and that's in part why it was kind of daunting to me to even think about, because that question was raised early on, I guess, when I was initially drafting the rural resilience and adaptation chapter, and it's like, where do we even start? So that's why I just tried to, summarize, hey, well, we've had a number of disasters which were really expensive, but yeah, to Liz's point, I mean, Liz, I have no idea what the cost for y'all just with the was it the March 22 catastrophic snowstorm down in our part of the state? But that must have been tremendous. I mean, and then and then all the work you guys are doing now. So, and that's just one sector among sectors, and we're not capturing like, I don't know to what extent a number even exists among the municipalities, everything. If you were to tally up all the local hazard mitigation plan actions, also all the costs that have been incurred, just from not even the declared disasters, but just from the run of the mill, climate enhanced events we've had. So this is probably something for the next report. I would love to be able to, and again, I'm hopeful that maybe something like the RIS effort is identifying or quantifying, the full slate of potential past damage and then, actions in the future.
Okay. All right, so that's kind of the end of our punch list. Assuming Jared, you and Secretary Moore can head off and do the kind of quick rewrite on this, whatever needs to change. I think considering I've heard a couple comments that this is relatively easy to read, I might caution against like significant like reshuffling of content and stuff like that. It sounds like it's maybe hitting the mark, but some of these other comments could really, sounds like there's an opportunity, particularly around the resilience piece to do a better job on that. Okay, so I got a couple thoughts. One is we could go to a break early, and then come back and start our work on the priority actions. The other is I would just want to have folks take a quick step back in your own minds, and really think, what's going to get in the way of me feeling okay about this plan next week when we're getting ready to approve it and actually trying to approve it? Like, if you really step back at this point, be like, how am I gonna be okay with this? I want to think about that a little bit. So maybe we go to break and you have some thought about that. And then when we look at the priority actions and I'll fast pass through them, and all this language that we're working on, like, is there anything else out there that's going to come back to bite us next week when we're trying to approve this plan and all its chapters? Chris, you came off mute there for a second. I don't know if you want to try to jump in.
My ADD brain just chased a squirrel. I was going to ask you to repeat again what you want us to think about when you covered that.
Okay, all good. Yeah, think about, put yourselves next Monday. We're doing all these little changes. We're showing the edits. We're figuring it out in a way you can quickly see the edits. And now it's time to say, can I live with this thing, right? Do I want to say yes to this and have it see the light of day, with my, stamp of approval behind it? What's going to get in the way, if anything, right? Is there something out there we just haven't dealt with yet that's going to trip you up, right? I will remind folks that we're going to create an opportunity for any counselor who wants to write like a signing statement, which can say, we want to keep these brief, right? But it's like, hey, I'm voting to say yes on this, and I'm deeply concerned about this, or I'm doing this for this reason. I just want to be able to explain myself a little bit better. So any counselor can do that, and those will get published as an annex to the plan. Okay. So my recommendation is 1:30. Let's take a 10-minute break, come back at 20 minutes to the hour, spend 10 minutes like seeing how you might answer the question I just asked you about any lingering, things that are really getting in the way. We'll spend doing 10 minutes for that. We'll do public comment, and then we'll do another look at our priority actions. All right, so we'll see you in 10 minutes. Okay? Okay, we're back. Thanks, everyone. You can make some signs of life that you're here. We can get going. All right. What I wanted to do before we go to public comment, which is scheduled for 10 minutes to the hour, 12, or no, excuse me, it's scheduled at the top of the hour at 1 o'clock. Before we get there, I wanted to circle back on the question I asked before going to break, which is there some sort of lingering something out there that's going to get in the way when we try to approve this thing next week? And I just want to check in and see if there is anything like that. And then we'll take a look at the latest version of the priority top 10, top 52. Anything that folks want to share right now as we get into this sort of home stretch? And if it's a perfectly fine answer that the things that are important to you are the ones that we're fixing right now and the conversations we're having, that's great. If it's something else, I just want to make sure that we're allowing for that to happen. Okay. All right. Do folks want to look at the top 10, top 52, the latest version? I will, let me just double check and see what's posted online. I'm having a little bit of trouble with what's online. Just a second. Sorry, I'm just taking a moment. I'm trying to see how this is. I'll show you my process while we're talking. I'm here on this trying to see what's posted and what's not posted. So we have top priority actions. And what that goes to is what used to be called our preamble text. And what's happened with that preamble text is it's has just sentence of introduction, and then there's the context, and it's basically taking all those bullets that we looked at before and making it more of a narrative format, and it has all that. And then it talks a little bit of criteria for action, and it turns that into a narrative. That's not what I wanted to look at, though, although we're going to look at that later. I'm just looking, Liz Ambler, do we have like top 10, top 52 posted somewhere?
Yeah, I haven't received an updated version from you from the last council meeting. So if you have that and you could send it, I will post that. But otherwise, we're going to be looking at what was posted at the last council meeting. So do you have that version from last meeting?
Yeah, and sorry, I thought I did send that to you, and I apologize if that didn't make it. And there was one edit, even from what I sent to you, that I was talking to Jared about, and we can look at now. I'll show it as a Microsoft Word document. Just give me 1 second. Okay, so the latest version of this, the June 16 version, and we can get this posted online shortly. It takes out the preamble language because now that is its own little chapter. Just says top 10, top 52. And for top 10, you'll remember last time we looked at it, I created these subheadings and then did my best at making sort of shortened bullet versions of the longer text below. And I encouraged you to get back with me if you had some thoughts about how to make it better. And Jared got back to me with one, which was around the cap and invest one, which was making sure that there's, and this is something I do want to talk about because this is one of the sensitive areas, but before it just said take the following steps or take steps to join a cap and invest program. And I think as we've talked about, and as there is language in the longer text, it's about joining as well. And so that's why it says now take preparatory steps and join a cap and invest program. Again, in the spirit of a 4-year plan, knowing that there is not actually an available plan to join right now. But it was important that this be consistent with some of the language below where we talk about the importance of joining. That's the only thing you'll notice in this top 10 that's different from before, is that little change. And again, I welcome if folks have better ways of either these little summary headings or the shortened version. Okay. Down below, it's basically just having accepted all the edits because we didn't do additional edits last time. So this is now a clean version. It has all edits accepted. It's not changed from the last time you saw it. It's just clean now. So that's all that's happened there. Oh, I see the top 10. So Jane, if I'm understanding this correctly, what you'd want to see is this essentially become a single merge thing with the preamble language, then the top 10, top 52. Okay, thanks, Jane. Why don't we go ahead and do that right away then? Okay. So I'm curious, counselors, is there anything in this piece? There's a hand up. Liz Miller, yeah.
It's hopefully just a clarification. I don't see, but I'm probably just missing where it's linked. Like, do we have this top 10 priority updated version somewhere accessible to look at other than on your screen?
No.
Okay.
And
I didn't see it, so I thought maybe I was missing it. Okay, it would be helpful to get that. And can we, I mean, we can either go through them one by one or whatever. There are a couple in here. I'm sure the one that you mentioned that Jared had edited, folks will want to talk about, but like the one on the electrification or whatever, I would prefer it to also note the word resilience, which supports actions below, like just things like that. If we're going to really dial this in, I feel like we need the same basic process we had with the chapters where we each get it. And if there are specific edits we need to send back to this updated version, we do that and then can talk through whether anyone has any problems with those. Thank you.
yeah. And yeah, let's do that. Let's get this posted ASAP. I'll send this very version to Liz Amler. She can get it up. And can I just make...
Can you send that now?
Yeah.
Thanks.
Can I ask one other process thing since you're doing that?
Yep. Yep.
I like Jane's idea of, you know, two separate, as you just discussed. Is there a numbering or is there a convention we're going to use on the 52 that we could incorporate in the top 10 for a cross-reference or no? Because I think that would be important to make your short version fully okay or whatever you want to call it. You know what I mean? Like
Ready to rock and roll?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we haven't done a different numbering system than what we had before yet, right? We have for each of these 4 buckets, we do 1 through whatever. And that's just sort of stuck around from before. And we haven't thought of a better way to number.
That's probably fine as long as we just maybe, you know, TBT 1 or whatever, like whatever.
Right. So you can reference right in here that number is what you're saying.
Yes.
And maybe even a hyperlink in the document to take you right to that
Ideally.
language.
And if there's some that overlap or cross, that will be identified that way, which would be helpful just in general, but also for our final approval, I would imagine.
Great. Okay. And Liz, can I make sure I capture what you were saying about for the electricity stuff, you'd want it to talk about resilience. Are you talking about the way it's...
Yeah, no, I'm happy to send that change in. It was an example of where I wanted to suggest a change. There might be others. It would just be like in that one, you know, on the fly, it would be support utility programs that ensure the electric grid supports customer electrification and remains resilient or is resilient or something. But anyway, point just being that having it to make those small tweaks would be helpful.
Got it. Okay. Great. And when folks hear Liz talk, if there's anything concerning about that, shout it out now so we can anticipate, you know, if we do need to do something more than just a quick edit that everybody says, yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Secretary Moore.
Yeah, I think along those lines, and I would want to sit and think about the words exactly, but I do think we need some sort of qualifier maybe around join a cap and invest. The treasurer was pretty clear in his remarks that it needs to be viable for Vermont, and the options that were available to us at that moment were not. And this does not have any of that that nuance, and I think that that's really important. I'm not prepared to suggest specific words, but I would have a hard time supporting it as written.
Right. And I think let's stick with this just for a second, right? Because so the way the actual cap and invest recommendation looks right now is this, right? Take the following steps to join a cap and invest program, and then it lays out these steps that are important, how you get there, right? And the first one is about the framework for reporting. The next is about, understanding the mechanism for affordability and addressing those concerns. And the third one is like continuing to track, right? Looking at the analysis, and based on that, right? Enjoying the best available program, right? So it's like, I think, Julie, that's kind of this has a little bit more of that nuance you're talking about, and this is where we talk about joining. So I guess what I'm hearing from you is, if this is okay, like how do we get this kind of slightly more nuanced version up into the hyper shortened version up above?
Yes.
Okay, great. Rich and then Jared.
Well, I think we're suffering a bit from our process, and I think
Yeah.
it can be solved with some edits, to the, as you say, the hyper shortened version statements.
Yeah.
But the ones that were selected as the top 10 were selected because they were, in that straw poll, they came to the top. And there is a separate recommendation concerning resilience of the electric grid, if memory serves. And so that's actually a separate recommendation that didn't make the top 10. Of course, it's super important. But if we're tempted to merge things into the top 10 that are also elsewhere in the recommendations.
Yeah. Right.
And
that we don't want to do. Right.
well, and in fact, I have a similar problem to the one that Liz had with respect to electrification, because the one that emerged from the straw poll was electrification of vehicles. But there's also a lot of support in the actions that we've discussed, a lot of support for electrification of buildings. And ideally, the short bullet that speaks to the electrification of vehicles would also say, and buildings. Either that or the cap and invest section would mention the importance of electrification and emission reductions in the thermal sector. So we're sort of, trying to figure out how to square a circle here.
Yeah, I hear your pain, and it's tempting, right? To like, in the same way we kind of rolled up a couple actions into individual of our top 52. I think think about how that happened, right? We sort of rolled a bunch of those individual things in the spreadsheet into, all of a sudden now we're tempted to roll up a couple things into our top 10. And we need to decide if we want to resist that temptation or give into it. So I think that might be an interesting conversation for you all. Jared?
Yeah, two things. The first is on the cap and invest language. And I think there's an important distinction I want to make is between kind of where we are right now versus the 4 years that this plan has to cover. And I think it's important to identify, as we already have, that there are next steps in terms of reporting and to enable participation in a multi-state program. But where I come from in thinking about the importance of this recommendation is that of all of the modeled strategies and actions none has been modeled to have as much of a benefit in terms of emissions reduction as a cap and invest program. And so to me, the importance of the recommendation is, yes, take the steps, but then sometime over the period of time that this plan covers, to actually join, because we don't actually reduce emissions or get the benefits of a cap and invest program until and unless we join. And if we don't have an explicit recommendation to join, then it's already difficult for this plan to add up, but there's certainly no way that this plan adds up. So and that was the kind of conversation and agreement throughout. Yes, recognize the preparatory steps, but then also recognize that in order to get the pollution reduction and get the benefits of a cap and invest program, you actually need to join. So I think both of those things need to be in there for the recommendation, and just and I'm only, so that's my recommendation.
Okay. Yeah, and I think, Jared, to Julie's point, when we talk about the join part in the third bullet of the cap and invest, we are providing some context around it of like, hey, there's nothing yet to join, and hey, we need to look at some more analysis. Like, that context is part of that, whereas we lose it in the hyper short. So I think the opportunity here is to, how do you give a little bit more of that context in the hyper short if you're going to hit it hard with and join. I think that's what we're talking about here.
And sorry, I just had one other second thing that I'll put in the chat that just because of the video recording, I'll say it out loud. We had never talked about within the 52 ranking them 1 through 52, or within the top 10 ranking them 1 through 10. And I think a lay reader could read that and say, oh, this comes first, that's the most important. I think we want to explicitly say that within the top 10 and within the top 52, right up front in the context, that they're not rank ordered in terms of priority.
Love that. Okay. Thanks, Jared. I'm glad you said that. Liz, back to you.
Yeah, I appreciate Rich pointing that out. That had not occurred to me in making my comment about the electrification one, nor the fact that it wasn't focused on vehicles as written. And my suggestion would be that, just as we had a process for the top 10, such as it was, that we have a process here, and if something makes sense and we all agree, then it makes sense to do. So like on that one, I can't imagine not referencing the mitigation, the resiliency side with the mitigation piece, but maybe I'll be outvoted, as it were. But I think we should be willing to have that conversation for ones that we need to.
Right. And I think what would be helpful is like, if we can point directly to the action within the top 52 that we're referencing, so we know at least what we're referencing.
Yeah, exactly. That was point one.
Yeah,
and we can definitely do Jared's, like, numbers are for reference only, not a priority, or whatever.
right. Okay. And I think, Liz, the question becomes, if we have one that has, adds some phrases or words at the end that kind of slip into another one of our top 52, how do we feel about that?
Yeah,
right?
no, I'm suggesting that I understand what Rich is saying, and I believe we should be willing to ask each other the question you just asked and then decide whether to include it. And it may be context, like there might be one where, of course, it makes sense and everybody agrees, and another where there's a significant disagreement. I don't know. But I having missed the last 20 minutes after the polling of the top 10, so I got to vote, but not thereafter participate. I mean, that was a pretty quick process. So I just can't imagine that that's the end of the answer for us as we're heading finalizing this thing.
Great. Thank you. Yeah. Rich, and then we'll grab any public comment that we have. Rich, over to you.
Yeah, quick response here. I'm agreeing with Liz. I think it would be appropriate for us to write a top 10 that includes either completely or by reference more than one of the itemized things on the list of 52. It would be fine with me to say you know, it's a top priority to do A plus B. And if we have identification numbers on those action items, the top 10 item can refer to both of them explicitly. And then that solves the incorporation problem without making it too crazy.
Right. And Rich, just so I know, like on you would want to do that around electrification. So there's like a common electrification one that speaks to transportation and buildings.
Yeah, and it would be easy to
Yeah.
refer to both of those things in one top 10 item.
Right. And from a grid standpoint, we could have the grid things that talks about utility programs and talks about resilience.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, counselors, I would say think about that. Let's not go too crazy because I don't want to just like wrap it all up and just like click, click, click. We list all of our 52. But I think, if it still fits in the spirit of focus and prioritization, let's try it with those two, and maybe there's another one. All right, let's do public comment. And then Joey, I'll grab your hand when we're done. And folks, if you're joining our meeting, do what Annette Smith did and raise your hand in the Zoom, or if you want to get my attention in the chat or some other way, or come off your and show your camera and wave at me, and we'll get you. But Annette, over to you.
Thank you. I'd like to speak to you about the power that this plan has and the recommendations that you make as you're thinking through the priority actions and what you're recommending, and the role of the accountability. And I'll be specific. With the clean heat standard, that was a specific recommendation to the legislature. The legislature followed your recommendation, and more than, I don't know how much money, $1.5 million, maybe $2 million has been spent on it. The Public Utility Commission came back and said, we don't recommend it. And Commissioner Margaret Cheney spoke on April 4th of this year to the Senate Finance Committee, and she was asked about it, and she gave perhaps the single best summary I've seen. It was overly complicated and overly expensive and would have had consequences on everyday Vermonters that I don't think we could sustain. It was a bureaucracy-heavy, administratively costly solution to what should really be deployment of work, directing services, etc. She went on to say that there were some things that need to be fixed, and this was already said by the PUC chair at McNamara to both the energy committees in the House and Senate. They have asked the legislature to please remove the directive to them to appoint a default delivery agent by September and to enforce the fuel dealer registry. And they recently issued something saying that they are not going to enforce it. But as a result, the Public Utility Commission has been put in the position of knowingly not complying with a law. And I wonder why someone, I think Jared was before the House Energy Committee 5 times. I think Rich was there a couple of times. Is there any accountability for the recommendations that are made when they are then come back to the legislature, not followed through on? I think it would have been helpful to the Public Utility Commission to remind the legislature that they have passed a law that has legal requirements for our Public Utility Commission. And honestly, I consider this to be very disrespectful to that body. And I wonder what else can happen as a result of the recommendations that you're making now. So that's my comment. Thank you.
Thanks, Annette. Appreciate that comment. And I think there's a comment in the room there in person. If you want to introduce yourself, and go ahead, please.
Good afternoon. I'm Sister Lorian Sieber. I'm a member of Vermont Interfaith Power and Light. And my comment here is general, and you are dealing with specifics. So I will just be brief. We want you to please keep the timelines of the climate action plan alive. we hope that you will increase public access to community solar. And encourage to eliminate or reduce climate emissions from the heating of buildings with fossil fuels. Those are things that we care about because our group is a group that is trying to take care of God's creation. And we look for you to be doing a piece of that. Thank you.
Thanks for that comment, and thanks for joining us in person. Okay. Are there other folks who have been listening to our conversation today that aren't a member of the council that would want to comment? Okay. Okay. So what I typically offer up to counselors on the back end of public comment like this is an opportunity to respond to what was said or provide a reaction to what was just heard. So we heard a couple comments there. Any quick reactions from counselors or thoughts to what you just heard? Rich?
Yeah, I'm happy to respond to Annette's comments. I agree largely with what she said, although I guess I disagree that there was any intent to be disrespectful to the PUC. As as everybody here knows, the Thermal Task Group and the Cross-Sector Mitigation Committee in the current plan has repeatedly said that we support a combination of policies to reduce emissions from the building sector that could include a cap and invest strategy, which is fairly consistent with what the PUC recommended with respect to, raising money and spending it to address the building sector, or a modified clean heat standard that would be simpler to administer. And so in this current plan, the intent of the cross-sector committee and the thermal task group has been all along to address the concerns that were raised by the PUC in its process. And I agree that it would be appropriate for the legislature to amend the statute to the degree that it shouldn't require the PUC to do things that right now wouldn't serve the purpose of advancing those goals.
Thanks, Rich. Yeah. Okay. All right, folks. At the back end, I'd assumed that we would need more time to look through our priority actions. I wouldn't mind. Oh, Joey, you had your hand up. Yes, that was what I wanted to do. Let's go to your hand.
Thank you, Annette and Sister Lorian, for your comments and engagement. My question relates to the priority actions. And I guess I'm just a little bit confused, and it sort of relates to the conversation we were having about trying to tie the priority actions to some other place where there's more detail about what more clearly we are speaking to. But in terms of under the cross-cutting, where we talk about identify funding and support the needed workforce, I thought the recommendation that David Mears had put forward was not just about funding climate workforce, I thought it was more about short-term, interim funding, more tied to the thermal sector, and maybe and tied to until some kind of program like a cap and invest moves, that we should have a shorter term revenue source. I'm just very confused.
Are you referring, sorry, Joy, to interrupt, but are you referring to language that's in the, super hyper summarized for top 10. Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, didn't we vote? I thought that we voted to support David's short term.
Yeah, it's this final bullet right here.
Yeah, and it's showing up under supporting the needed workforce. Is that what those?
This is idea number 1. This is idea number 2. They're not actually connected. It's
Okay.
just bucketed into like other. And so if we can write that in a way that doesn't lead to the confusion you're having, that would be awesome.
I guess it just be clear to people and to ourselves what we thought that was intended to support.
Yeah, David, maybe just flipping the order of them so it
Yeah,
matches the
that could
order
do
of the
it.
title would be helpful.
That could help. Yep.
Yeah.
Give you your very small but meaningful suggestions, Secretary Moore.
And
That
I
helps
think
a
it might
lot.
solve it.
And I think, yeah, maybe it would follow with more detail down below if we number them or label them.
Yeah.
And
And David, I would actually flip the order of the bullets, not the order of the title. I would have kept it identify funding
Oh, I
first.
see. Okay, and great. And I was worried someone was reading it. If I go back to what we had. I was worried someone would be funding for workforce, but we definitely can flip the bullets instead. Okay. Sorry, I'm not on my normal machine, so I'm a little clunkier today. Thanks, Joey, for shouting that out. And
you
yeah,
dropped an S after your yeah, there you go.
okay. Yeah, and so just to be super clear, we're gonna link these directly to the specific, one of the 52 priority actions will be, linked in some clever way here, maybe in a parentheses in the end, for more information, see da 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 or something like that, right? And what we're talking about is, are there situations where we actually want to link it to more than one, right? Right, this reduced greenhouse gas emissions through electrification of vehicles and buildings and heating or something, right? And then you link it to the 2 priority actions that talk about those electrification ones. That's a choice you can make as a council to like expand a little bit what your top 10 is. Same thing with utility programs. If you wanted to do support utility programs and ensure and blah, blah, blah. And it's actually 2 of the grid ones down below, not just 1. Joey, did that answer your question though?
Yeah, I think that helps a lot. I don't know if like Jared's and also rather than and. I mean, so that they could be attached, but they're not singularly, like we're talking about funding to support. Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you.
Right. And this is the one where there's some consternation because when we say that and join down below, we wrap that text with some more like nuance and reality of like there isn't something to join right now, and there's studies underway to figure out how to do it, right? And so that nuance is below, it's kind of lost in this hyper summary. And that's making some folks uncomfortable. And I would welcome ideas about how to pull in some of that greater nuance that's in, I'll just shoot down here real quick, this paragraph right here, right? This is where we say, and join. Right? Okay. Great. So I would love to be able to not have this hanging over our head so much for next week, this particular item right here. I know this is hard to do in real time, but I want to just check with everybody. If we go back and try to pull in a little bit of the nuance in that 3rd bullet below where we talk about and join, is it okay if I work with some of you over the next day or two and get a new version of this so that people can feel, a larger number of people on the council can feel more comfortable with that point. Is that all right if I work with folks to do that? Okay. Julie?
I wonder, and put it out there and recognize it may not be acceptable, but could it just be as easy as saying when a viable option is available?
I mean, there is not a viable option right now, so
Correct.
it's kind of factual in that way.
Yes, and it mimics the language of the legislature's charge in evaluating cap and invest, as well as the language in the treasurer's recommendation.
Okay, so let me check with other folks on counselors. If we did something that said, I'm just going to put in brackets for the moment, enjoy it, when a viable option is available. Again, all we're doing here is the very hyper short version. Sorry, my screen is getting all messed up with everything. And a viable option is available. We are not changing what's down below. We're just for the hyper short summary version. It's relevant to spend some time with it because I can imagine a little graphic coming out of this that's going to be our sort of top 10 graphic that has like 4 different buckets of stuff in it, and it might look nice and be easy to communicate. So it's helpful that you as a council feel comfortable with this language. Rich?
If we're going to add that additional language, I think we should emphasize that we should take priority steps now and join a cap and invest program. I would say as soon as a viable option is available.
Sorry, I'm having a little screen problem right now.
I mean, we all acknowledge that we would have to look at any options as they are available and to determine whether they're viable for Vermont. So we're obviously going to do that.
Okay. Others, any concerns with doing what's on this page right now? Take preparatory steps now and join a cap and invest program as soon as a viable option is available. Thanks, Jared. Matt, okay. Okay. Well, that's good that we're circling in. That's one delicate piece that it seems it's helpful to get that clarity on. Okay. Can we just do one more round here just to save us time tomorrow, next week, which is I've heard 2 ideas about expanding out a little bit these top 10. One is right here. This electrification, reduce greenhouse gas emissions from vehicles and buildings. Right? And then that would reference what's currently action number 2 and action number whatever it is, Rich, I can't remember, it's whatever it talks about fuel switching, electrification. I think it's like 7 or something like that. So I'm just curious, does anybody feel uncomfortable doing something like that? And we would explicitly reference those 2 pieces. Okay, so I'm hearing not concerned about that. Joey?
I mean, I don't have concerns about it. I think that makes sense, and I actually think it tracks with the taking preparatory steps and joining as soon as a viable option is available, cap and invest, because I think that is a primary tool to drive the revenue and the sort of market for electrification. So I feel like it kind of tracks in that way.
Great. Okay. All right, and Stephanie, I see your comment in there. I don't feel strongly like if it says in transportation or buildings, whatever people feel is right, vehicles, whatever you think is more evocative to the reader. And
Yeah, no, I just deleted my comment because it doesn't,
okay,
I mean, vehicles can also mean, I don't know, do you consider planes a vehicle? That would be my only question. Just something that make sure that if we're going to do this, that it's covering all of those kinds of vehicles. But so maybe I was trying to step back too far, but I think it's fine. This is simple language
okay,
and it's understandable to people. So
okay, super. Thank you. And then let me get this other one right up above. So the resilience piece that Liz is talking about, is that a different action? So the grid ones, electricity ones we have are actions 4, 5, and 6 below. Are we suggesting here, if we type that word in there, all of a sudden, are we citing a separate one of these 4, 5, and 6? Maybe Liz, you know them better than anybody, but
I feel like we are. I mean,
right.
that's really meant to be about sort of I think the capacity of the grid to support all of the electrification.
Right. So this one, we're really before adding that resilience thing, we're really talking about number 4, right? That's the one we chose, I think, if I remember correctly. And then the other two are about
The customer supports are in 6.
right.
So I think what Liz was asking for is cross references to 4 and 6.
4 and 6. Okay. Are folks comfortable with that? And so we would up here, if we were to do something like that, sorry for the scroll, we would cite 4 and 6 here. If we do the linking, direct linking.
David, I think that's correct, but I would say it's customer electrification and grid resilience.
Great.
Support utility programs that ensure the electric grid supports customer.
Unfortunately, have support and support.
Yeah, I know. Support utility programs.
Why not just resilience? I mean, it's resilience.
Ensure. Oh, Liz, are you there? Good. You can
Yeah,
fix
yeah.
it.
It's just, I mean, it's just resilience for customers and communities. So I think the word resilience on its own would be good enough, but
Yeah.
just be my thoughts.
Okay. That's good.
And here, I don't know if support's the right word. We'd support a lot here, but I don't have a better word right now.
I think that's where the cross references become important. So that's fine.
Okay. Other counselors who've been quiet for a little bit, are you comfortable with these changes we're doing here? So for these two in particular, we're actually citing 2 different actions below. Any thoughts or concerns from other counselors? Okay. All right, folks. So I think I mean, we'll post this right away. I can work with someone to cite at the end of each one of these the specific piece below, and we can get the formatting right. Maybe this is the moment where we join it all together with the preamble language. We make a nice little single document. Joey?
Sorry, this is really nitpicky, but I mean, reducing emissions, I guess I just was looking back at the definitions. Well, we don't define emissions. I mean, I think many of us know we're talking about greenhouse gas emissions. I just wonder in like providing more accessible language.
This is the other way we talk about it throughout the document.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was wanting to recommend, but I would want to see that elsewhere if we make that change here, just so that it carries through, or we define it in the definitions.
All right, and I'm glad you brought that up too, Joey, because we've been making a little bit ad hoc, but decisions around that. And I showed you earlier, like the chapter titles are changing a little bit because of that. So we were using the language of reduce emissions, right? Emissions reduction overview, but we could do climate pollution reduction overview, right? Something like that. So as people wish.
Yeah, I guess I mean, I defer. It just seems pretty wonky, and if it's not defined, but whatever, maybe the folks who are making it more plain language accessible could choose a pathway that is more clear and or make sure that we're defining and then
Right.
calling it greenhouse gas emissions where it is referenced. But I would lean towards plain language and make it consistent, but sorry to
Is
rate.
climate pollution more plain language in your mind?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay. Right. Right, now's the time, yes. So if
David,
folks, I think, yeah, I think this is the time, right? So if this is like, okay, you know what, folks, we're not gonna use like cross-sector mitigation as our like titles and things like that. We'll use reducing climate pollution, right? That kind of thing. If folks are okay with it, let's say yes to that right now, and then Liz Ambler and Jane and I and we can all go make those changes throughout.
I'm voting yes on that too.
Awesome. Thanks, Rich. Anyone as a no vote on that? Okay. That's really helpful. Thanks, folks. All right. Okay, so we're going to end a little early unless I'm missing something. I'm going to put up that slide that has the what we're going to do on Monday, next Monday. Just give me 1 second. Is that big enough for folks to see? Okay, today we made it through all of this. We have some work we want to do to fix stuff, but we have good notes. So that's great. Next week, we're going to have some important ones like the executive summary and the preamble, which we can combine with the priority actions. The letter from the council, we have a first draft of that. And then the scientific underpinning of emissions. This is probably going to be our most interesting one to work through. And the idea for next week, if we are able to do it, we make a punch list. We work through a punch list. We make very detailed notes if we are making changes, right? I'll share back my detailed notes and says, these are the exact changes that will be made, right? And we all agree to them as a council. And then we get into our exercise of, are we in a place to adopt this plan, right? Now, if we are stuck, mired, and we're having a really hard time, we're like, we're not ready for this. We've actually put June 27th on the books as well as a backup, right? It would be phenomenal to not have to use that backup. And the way we do that is by agreeing to a set of notes from the first part of the meeting, and then we adopt the plan in the second part of the meeting. There's one thing that's not on this slide as well, is an overview of the full table of actions. And that's challenging because Liz Ambler and others are going through it right now and making sure there's coherence with the way we're using language in our top 52. And so there's a little bit of fixing that up right now, and we've talked to the steering committee about that. But we're going to take a look at that on the 23rd as well and just say, hey, here's the full table as well. That's part of the story, right? So that's going to go on.
Hey, David, just while we're on the slide, I just want to note that's not the most updated slide. We're not holding the 27th. We're actually holding the 26th. So folks know. And then also, as far as the tables, what we agreed with the steering committee on was to update the language of the priority actions in the table and to not change any other recommendations at this time. Just to be clear.
Right. Right. Harmonizing the language that's in our top 52
Correct.
into that table. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Sorry about that. And so, yeah, if you click on what Liz has as a better share, it's sideways for me, so I have to tilt my head like this. Okay, so that's our plan, folks. Any quick questions about process? I will say, I mean, we're gonna try to do as fast a turnaround on all this stuff right now, as opposed to what happened last week where it kind of dribbled out and then didn't get put up until this morning because I was late getting stuff. It just means like, Rich, you and Carrick and I need to get the buildings thing out the door, like ASAP. The little nips and tucks we're doing now, we need to get out the door ASAP. And then Liz Amler can send a note around and be like, hey, folks, everything is updated now on here. We are good to go. And so you all know when to dive in and be like, okay, I can read the executive summary now. I'll do a deep dive back on the top 52, right? That's what we'll be able to signal to you during this week. Okay. Okay. Chris?
It's a little thing, but I suggested some language in the text for under the never mind.
I put it in my notes. Yeah.
Okay, got it.
I put it in my notes as an update to that one rural resilience piece, and I'll just update it. I didn't see anybody having problems with it in the chat, so
that's all I wanted to check on, just because we didn't mention it at all, which is fine. I just want to make sure nobody had any heartburn over it.
Yeah. Thanks, Chris. And I'm happy to scroll back up and look at that, right, and read it aloud even. I think you were trying to get at more specificity on the back end, right?
Yeah, I just wanted to call out explicitly the growing away from fluvial erosion and landslide hazards, because we've heard a lot from the public, especially ever since the disasters in 2023, just kind of concern and alarm about related to 181. Why would we put money and resources into historic settlements that keep flooding? So I just wanted to try to address that head on. We heard that in some of the public comment in the meetings too.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, I just cut and paste the second version of that you did in the chat. I put that in the notes.
It's no big deal. I'm not trying to inflate it. I just want to make sure that trying to head off any alarm at the next meeting.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that. Okay. All right. Joey.
Sorry.
Yeah, it's all good. What's up?
I guess I should have raised this before we went really quickly, but I do want to like echoing David Mears's appreciation for the definition section, the land acknowledgement, also very well written. I don't know who did that, but very nice. On the public engagement, which was also a very good summary. I was just reading through it quickly again, and I just wonder about, on page 8 of the public engagement summary, it sort of highlights 3 things that were broad support: and public transit education and utility scale biomass study. That's all great. I also had heard strong support publicly for things like Cap and Invest, because it reduced pollution and answer the question of how you could raise revenues. I'm just curious, like, what that list, where that came from, and if I think it would be important to mention that there was strong public support for that there in that list.
Sorry, which page are you on?
I'm on page 8
of the public engagement.
Yeah. Sorry, we didn't, I guess, oh boy. That on page 8 there. So, anyway, just flagging that because the 3 things that are flagged are also important, and in terms of the kinds of strategies we need that would put us on a path to cutting pollution, might be helpful to highlight that one.
Action Force was broad support. The meetings were made in the top. Oh, right. I think you have to go further back. to, I'll look at that, and it's too
Okay.
bad that Sophie's not on the call, but I think, um, I I feel like capital investment is one of the key things that we mentioned in that summary. So I'm reading through this myself, like, wait, where did that go? I think it was more like that final, the line 169, 170, 171. Is that what you're looking at?
Mhm.
Those are all things that rose up in the public meetings and they just stayed as part of the top 50-ish. For Cap and Invest, that got raised up to the top 10. So I'm almost positive it's somewhere else.
Okay. All right.
I'll figure that out, but I
You
appreciate
look
you
like
saying
you're
it.
stressed. I do not mean to.
Sorry, I just like I
Okay, it
realized
looks
like
like
where'd it
it's
go?
lines 135 to 136.
Great, thank you.
There we are.
137, yeah.
That's it. I was like, I know this is in here. Right. So it's actually like trying to say like, hey, this got lifted up to top 10.
Great. Thank you for all of those sections.
Okay. Anything else that's like nagging folks like that? Okay. All right. So thank you, everyone. We're in this. I feel like we are so close. We've got a week to go. I will do my part in trying to do as fast a turnaround on this stuff. And if folks need to work with me, I encourage you to send me a text as I'm going to be a little bit slow on email this week. I think I can work with Liz, Amler, and Jane to make sure stuff is posted and everybody's clear when stuff is posted. And yes, typos, Jael, please send those along to Liz Amler. That'd be really helpful. Okay. Jane or Liz Amler or anyone else, any last things before we finish up here?
Just one question. I believe that multiple folks heard this feedback, but just as we were pausing on plain language and public feedback, I wanted to make sure that the recommendation that got added in, I believe on thermal energy networks, I had heard from work in that space requesting that language be community scale geothermal to be more inclusive. And so just want to make sure that got kind of caught and incorporated. And if not, happy to work with somebody on that. But I think it's really just the suggestion to be as inclusive as possible of the different technology types to say community scale geothermal rather than thermal energy networks. Just want to make sure that
Right,
didn't get lost.
right now, I did get lost. Right now, it says utilities and the regulator should adopt standards and programs to support geothermal networks. That's what it says.
Yeah, and
I sent it by email to you, David, and well, no, I think I sent it to Liz and Jane on the most recent email chain. So Jared, I think the email that I sent them probably covers your comment, and I got the same email request.
Okay. If someone could CC me on that, I'll make sure between all of us it gets in there.
I'll forward it to you.
Thank you. Okay. Jane?
Yeah, I put this in the chat, but I'm just gonna say it again here and just confirm with you, David. But I feel like our office should be running point right now, not having you in the middle. I
would love that.
Yeah, you're away, and I think there's a risk of things falling off the radar. So Liz should be the point person, and you can copy me and David on things. But I really think everything should be going to Liz at this point, and we'll be running point to coordinate and reaching out to David where we need support on that.
That is very wise. Okay. Anything else? Great. All right, folks. Well, let's end early. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you next week. and really appreciate all this work in the final hurrah. There's going to be a lot of reading to do, so maybe block a little time on your calendars for reading later this week. Take care, folks. And there's one more thing. We will send around that governance document that explains how we do decision making and voting and all that stuff, and we'll point to that. So we'll all read that together as we move into our decision making next Monday.